Let's go to Ann Barry. I believe she's still with us, and Scott Martin. Is Jackie with us as well? I just see Ann and Scott. So Ann, let me get your take on that. Oh, Jackie is there. Basically, this is going to go on a long time. And basically, I can kind of see that, you know, the political response, we better not leave this with no response. They're under increasing pressure by their own words and their threats to do something. What I'm not clear on, and I know you're leery of maybe the government getting over involved here, but that something is going to be done. I guess what I'm asking you then is what would do the least harm in the market's eyes to police this? Because the market, I guess, is always worried, if you police them, how soon is it before you police us? If you restrict their trading, how soon is it before you go after restricting our trading? If you charge them for doing what they did, how soon is it before you charge us for trades and all this other stuff that's out there, you know, all across? I'm just wondering what would be the least foul alternative as far as government interaction here?
You know, Neil, I wonder whether one of the lessons that could be taken in looking at the banks out of the financial crisis could start to be applied for some of these alternative asset platforms. One of the things that the CEO of Robinhood is saying in different ways when he's asked the question is we weren't ready. We couldn't have anticipated for this to happen. And so we didn't have the liquidity available to handle the unthinkable. And so, Neil, when I think about what could be a path of less harm as the new administration learns their way through this, is there a way to ask the Robinhoods of the world and more of the hedge funds of the world to do more stress testing, to really try and analyze what would happen to their business models under certain risk scenarios, or even thinking the unthinkable, and make sure that they have a plan in place, a business continuity plan in place to handle it. So that's one idea I would throw out there that helps to get some education going to the regulatory institutions, but also forces some of these businesses to make sure they're prepared in ways they haven't been so far.
All right, Ann, that makes way too much sense, so that's not going to happen, so we're done with you. I'm kidding. Scott, I'd be curious, too, what do you tell investors? Because I've always stepped back and I'm always intrigued by how you guide investors through something like this. You can understand their frustration about this is the only game in town. I see so many people around me and hear about these guys who become instant millionaires or woulda, shoulda, coulda on Bitcoin when it was trading at 1,000. Now it's north of 51,000. They want in on that party. But as you know, in your young life, I mean, that's not a widespread or heavily attended party. There are very few people who manage to pull that kind of thing off. So what do you tell them when, especially younger investors who hear that you're offering them a market superior return, but they're saying, well, yeah, 8, 9, 10%. No, thank you. I want the 50, 100, 300% return. What do you say?
Yeah, they want the stuff that everybody's talking about, but I don't think a lot of people, to your point, Neil, are actually getting. It makes for good headlines, it's good sensationalism, but it's really not there. As investment advisors, I have clients of my own, Neil, we try to steer people clear of some of this really speculative stuff. I mean, unlike Roaring Kitty, and nothing against him, I don't know him personally, but for him to come out and say that GameStop was an attractive stock at 5, 10, 50, 100 because of fundamentals seems nuts to me. To your point about stuff that we invest in, like the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsoft, the Apples, the Adobes, PayPals, Visas, companies we really like and understand and fundamentally have some security in them, those are where we direct our investors, because unlike some of the comments in the previous segment about how this is a bad mark on the overall market, I really don't think it is. I think to put GameStop and Bed Bath & Beyond and AMC and Fossil and a couple of other these stocks that got really manipulated into the same category as, oh, this could happen to Amazon and Microsoft and Google, I just don't see it. Those companies are way too big and way too actively traded to have this kind of manipulation that came through on GameStop when it was trading at $5 a share and was well under $1 billion in size. I mean, it was, as Charlie said earlier, basically a penny stock. So we try to steer clear of these kind of speculative names, Neil, and get people into real fundamentals of the market, which you can find, and you can find return, and you can find some safety and some more predictability, and I think the names that I mentioned.
That's interesting. I just should have listened to my teenage sons because, well, I thought GameStop was going out of style because you download games and all. They said plenty cool to us, Dad. And by the way, just give us $30 for this. So maybe I missed something there, but I'm clearly showing my ignorance. But you know, Scott raises a very good point, though, Jackie, when you think about it. He drew distinctions and did research, and his firm does research, as does Ann's, to take a look at. There is a difference between an Amazon or you know, some of these other companies that come along, or a Tesla, that are building something that a smart analyst could start, you know, crunching the numbers and saying, all right, this is not a Pets.com. This is not some pie in the sky investing on potential versus earnings that might never come. There is a craft to that, and it's called homework. It's doing your research. Sometimes the research doesn't pan out right away. Early investors of Amazon were frustrated. They weren't seeing any gains for a long time before they were. But there's no shortcut to homework. I don't know if that's, you know, any sage advice on my part, but I would say that, you know, hard work is one thing, but also doing your research matters, no matter what it is, in terms of buying, you know, a furnace for your home, or, you know, checking out contractors and who's good at what, and yeah, buying stocks that might be risky. What do you think?
It's a lesson for all of us, Neil, and it applies broader than just the stock market as well. As you say, you know, when you work hard for a buck and you're going to spend it on something, whether it's an equity purchase or a physical asset, like you mentioned, you know, remodeling, whatever the case may be, you do need to do your research to make sure that you don't get burned. And you mentioned the companies, the tech companies that everybody loves, like Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple. These are companies that if you sat back and looked at them and you could pull their financials up on the internet, you could see they have cash flow. They have earnings, they have a business model, they have innovative leaders. They're trying to change their business model with a plan, with a structure. The last time that I was talking about GameStop before the frenzy was an assignment where I was standing in front of GameStop telling you about the fact that there was nobody in the store. Nobody was buying anything, and this wasn't a sustainable business model anymore. So there are some people out there like Roaring Kitty, for example, who will say, well, they finally got with the program and they're not just selling these game cartridges. They're going to start competing with Fortnite and all of these online gaming apps and whatever the case may be. But they're really, really late to the party. I mean, so what it comes down to about investing is sit back, look at the thesis, try to understand what the business model is, what they're doing. Are they an early mover? Are they a late mover? Really basic stuff. But to your earlier point, people look at the stock market and they see other people making these kinds of gains, and the hedge funds and smaller investors, and they want a piece of it, and they sort of feel like they've been left out of it. So something like this happens with GameStop. And remember the role that technology played here. I will disagree with Roaring Kitty and say this is not like the conversation that you have on the golf course or at the water cooler. The technology democratized that conversation the same way it did in the Arab Spring, which I covered, for example, where people were able to organize themselves and they were able to get together in a way that they never have before. That technology is out there, so this is not going to stop as we move forward.
Yeah, you know what gives me pause, though, and reputable stock people who follow the market for a living, they generally don't have nicknames, right? I mean, I know Warren Buffett is the sage, I get that, but Scott Martin is not Man Martin, you know, and you're not Dizzy Berry, right? I mean, you are now. But if I know I'm going into an investment recommended by Roaring Kitty, someone should grab me and just say, Neil, what are you doing? And sometimes these are manifestations of craziness that all I tell people is, maybe you should step back a little bit. There might be perfectly justifiable reasons to get into this, and you like hearing them from a guy named Roaring Kitty, fine. But maybe that should tell you something. Maybe that should indicate how frothy and almost theatrical this has become. But I'm just wondering whether that kind of behavior and that drove mentality to follow that behavior is part of the problem here. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves. What do you think?
I think, and Jackie sort of touched on when she talked about the Arab Spring. I mean, the fact that that could be drawn as a comparison is extraordinary, but it points to the idea that this crowdsourcing of ideas, social media pulling on so many different individuals to come up with ideas, project them and amplify them, whether it's on stock trades, whether it's on political positions. I think what you're really sort of leaning into here, Neil, is do we have appropriate disclaimers? Do we have on these platforms enough caveat emptor, buyer beware warnings that the content that people are receiving is not from folks who are professionally trained in that whole homework process, which Jackie laid out? And so, I don't know that Madman Martin necessarily is going to be the turnoff for people to listen to those voices. We'll see that Twitter handle, I'm sure, bounce up. But I do think it's about disclaimer. And again, I think it comes back, how do we reach folks younger, folks who are digitally native, who are growing up with social media and mobile devices in their hands, and how do we teach them early to do their homework on where their content is coming from and to make sure that they're educated from lots of different sources before they go ahead and pull the trigger on some really risky behavior?
All right, I'm still working on a nickname for you. And Scott, I've got you figured out. Jackie, don't get me started. But we'll see what happens. By the way, one viewer is letting me know, who are you to rail against nicknames, Neil the Heel? I see what you did there. A little more to this.